So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It being the allotted time at 6 p.m, I'll declare this meeting open. And I do apologise for the croaky voice. It will come back to me eventually. On behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. May their campfires burn forever. I'd also like to remind everyone that our meetings are recorded and live streamed and uploaded to the town's website. I only have one announcement tonight, and that is to remind our residents that we have a draft Local Planning Scheme 11 out for community consultation. Because a planning scheme can affect your local area and the amenity of the area in which you live, I would encourage all ratepayers and residents to peruse that document and to provide their feedback. Now, feedback must be provided back to the town by the 14th of July. If you do not wish to do it online, you can go to the town library or you can go to 35 Old Perth Road, where there are hard copies of the documents and also hard copies of the feedback form should you wish to do it in that format. Councillors will now go to attendances, apologies and applications for leave of absence. I do not believe we've got any apologies tonight. And are there any applications for leave of absence? No, so we'll move on. Councillors, do we have any declarations of interest on any items in tonight's agenda? No, so we will move on. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the part of the meeting that is presentations or deputations. I do not believe we have any deputations. No. So the next part of the meeting is statements from members of the public. If you would like to make a statement, it's limited to 2 minutes per person. I would ask you to come to the microphone, say your name and address, and provide your statement. Ms. Seidel, I believe you had your hand up. Mrs. Seidel, sorry.
Anyway, it's great to see the new technology down here at this end of the room.
If you just wait till it's turned on.
Okay, my first statement, I'd like to actually make two, if that's okay. First statement's about celebrating Barak citizenship ceremony, which I consider is really important, and it shouldn't happen in December. It's an insult to the local Aboriginal community, and for the last 2 to 3 years, Barak has been part of the Australia Day ceremony at Mary Crescent. It's a healing ceremony as well as a welcome ceremony to all the people who attend. The smoking ceremony is a cleansing ceremony that exposes us all, and for the people who choose to become Australian citizens, it's really important as it embraces this country's culture before settlement. Then I'd like to talk about a Filipino woman who actually attended the Australia Day ceremony at Mary Crescent this year. I took my camera along to record the event, right? And here was this Filipino woman. She came on her own, dressed in her national costume, but for her it was really important to be at that event, and she stayed until the bitter end, even though it was getting like, 30 plus degrees heat and we're all sitting in the sun. But when you have to understand, when people actually make a commitment to become a citizen of Australia, this is a really big deal. And I really feel embracing the Aboriginal culture as part of the Australia Day event is very important, and I feel that if it gets downgraded and separated as being suggested tonight in one of the items, I really think it's a step backwards for the town of Bassendean. So I'm saying don't split the event, keep it for one day where we can all celebrate our Aboriginal traditions and welcome our new citizens to this country. So that's what I'd like to say on that matter.
Okay, so that's item 12.2 on the agenda, Ms Seidel. Okay, thank you very
Alright.
much.
Well, the next statement I'd like to talk about is about tree protection orders, and that have been lodged. There needs to have a moratorium placed on these trees that have been submitted by residents in the town of Bassendean. Any lodged tree protection order, all it needs to do is go before, it should also need to go before council once the staff have made an assessment in granting a TPO. We have lost a jacaranda tree in West Road, and now we have lost 2 marriage trees in Ashfield. All of these have been removed. The one in West Road was removed on Australia Day at 7 a.m. in the morning, and there's been no construction on that site, but it's, get rid of it. And I have sent emails to the town of Bassendean, to the interim CEO, wanting more information, but I just feel that tree, it was over 60 years old, part of the historic inventory, gone. The 2 marrow trees that have also been removed, a TPO was lodged 2 months ago by a resident. Now we have lost these 2 marrow trees. The staff may be busy on other matters, but it's quite clear they aren't taking seriously in keeping our trees that help maintain our tree canopy and reduce the hot island effect. The lack of action by the staff shows that the community who value these mature trees within the town of Bassendean, that then you really wonder why, when those trees go, that then the community really lose the trust of the staff. And I have to make a comment here.
So, Carol,
I'm nearly finished.
yes, but I would prefer that it's not necessary to actually make assumptions about the staff.
All right.
So,
I was going to congratulate Phil though, because he's always been very good at communicating with the Bassendean tree women, and I want that relationship to continue, because we have saved a lot of trees and agreed when trees need to be removed, and I think Phil needs to be acknowledged for liaising with us tree women, so I have to say that. Anyway, what I'm asking is the staff be more proactive in protecting our trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Seidel. If you'd like to take a seat. Before I move on with statement time, is there anyone else who'd like to make a statement? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is public question time. And again, sorry, I've missed something, haven't I? No?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Public question time.
Right. So public question time. Just before we head on to asking people in the audience, there have been several questions sent through by a resident, Mr Yates. They will be responded to during the week and appear in the minutes.
Robinson's here.
Mr Robinson is here in the room, so I'll allow you to ask your own questions. And I do not believe there are any other questions from
Mr. Lelouch.
Mr Malouche as well. So we have some people in the room who have provided their questions already, and if you would like to put your hand up and come up to the microphone and you can ask your questions, and I will get the staff to answer your questions. So who would like to go first? Mr Robinson, if you could state your name and street.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton and Council, for allowing me to put my questions this evening. My name is Peter Robinson, and my wife is here with me, and we are new residents to Bassendean. We live in Ashfield Parade. So my questions relate to the destruction of the 2 marrow trees, which have already been mentioned tonight, so I won't use up time talking about that. I think all the councillors know what happened there. I understand you've been advised that the trees are cut down on a Saturday morning. Mr Gibson, whom I thank for his response to my earlier question, has informed me that the property owners had been advised of my nomination for a preservation order, and he also has advised me that the town is unlikely to pursue formal compliance action. So I've actually got 5 questions, but I understand I've got a limit of 2 at a time, so I'll do the first 2 first, if you're happy with that, Mayor.
Yes.
So my questions are, will the town look into the tree preservation nomination process that has been demonstrated to accelerate the destruction of trees under consideration in order to prevent a similar precipitate action by a landholder? And the second question is, have there been any other trees destroyed by landholders who've been notified of their trees being under construction?
Mr Gibson, would you like to respond to these?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the town will review its process as part of the future review of Local Planning Policy 13, and that will occur following Council's consideration of Draft Local Plan Scheme number 11, which is anticipated to occur in August this year. So the town will therefore be reviewing the policy between September and December this year.
I guess that answers the first part of my first question, but it doesn't answer the second part, which asks, will you do a review in order to prevent similar precipitate action from landholders? So,
through Madam Mayor, we'll review the process, but we will be restricted potentially by the scheme, the provisions contained in the Draft Local Planning Scheme number 11.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Second question was about other trees.
Through Madam Mayor, in terms of the query about whether there's been any similar actions, the town is aware of one, although it is unclear in that example whether, whilst the town did issue a notice to the owner, whether the owner actually received it before choosing to remove the tree.
I'll step aside.
I'll allow you to ask one more question and then I'll go to some others.
Okay. The third question is, has the decision whether to pursue formal compliance been delegated to the town's officers, or does it remain with you, the council?
I think I'll have the CEO to answer that.
I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to answer, Madam Mayor, and thanks for your question, Peter. That will be a matter for the CEO, so the decision whether to take legal action will be one that I'll need to make, and that will be weighed up based on the pros and cons of the likelihood of success and the cost before any action is taken.
Okay.
It would be incumbent on me to also discuss it with the presiding member before using ratepayers funds on legal action.
Thank you.
The next person who'd like to ask, Ms. Jefferson, oh sorry, Mr. Malouche, you're already up, so you can come to the microphone.
My name's Ian Maluis, Unit 322 Elsfield Bay. Great idea. The letter I sent to the town, I mentioned item 9.1, but that was actually the
Briefing.
session one, so this is actually 12.2. The Arts, Culture and Events Committee meeting, which agrees to stage of celebrating Barak early December, incorporating recognition of International Volunteers Day, and note that a citizenship ceremony will be hosted in late January. My questions: what does celebrating Barak mean, and what is the event proposed? And the second part of that is, will the town be celebrating the other 5 seasons of the Noongar calendar?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to take those questions if you like, and thanks for your questions, Ian. I'll probably take the first one on notice because tonight we are discussing the Barak ceremony, and I'm aware that there's already an alternate motion from moving it from that date to another date closer to Australia Day. So I think if we move the event, the reason for the event and the type of event that is depicted on that particular day will change significantly. But in the past, it has been a celebration of the oldest living culture, together with welcoming our newest members to the Australian community in what is an Australia Day function as endorsed by the National Australia Day Council. So it's met all of those criteria to be respect our past, celebrate our future going forward as one nation with multicultural societies as well as Indigenous culture. So I think that's where it sat up until this year's ACE committee recommendations, and until we have tonight's meeting, I'm not sure where it might end up, but that was the essence of the celebration of Barak. Even though it's the word Barak meaning summer season, I think it was the fact that the terminology depicted our Indigenous culture out of respect, and the fact that it was held in that time of year, that was the thinking. And we're probably not the only council that did it. I know the City of Perth did the same thing last year. In relation to the second part of your question, the answer is no. No discussions at this stage have taken place with the ACE committee around celebrating the other seasons within the Indigenous calendar. And I'm not at liberty to say whether that's going to happen in the future, but at the moment there has been no discussion.
My second question is, will the town of Bassendean be celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January, and if so, holding a citizenship ceremony on that day?
Good question. And I think tonight there's an alternate motion to discuss that, so I think if you stay around you might see that play out. So at the moment there is an alternate motion around combining an event with a citizenship ceremony later in January.
So will I get an answer to that tonight? Basically,
It'll be
after is a yes or no answer.
Well,
will they be celebrating Australia Day?
Well, I think the alternate motion hasn't been debated, but the alternate motion is going to be put tonight, and I'm suggesting you stay and see how that plays out. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Ms Jefferson, I believe you had your hand up previously. Thank you, Mr Malouche.
Ronnie Jacobson, Spartan Parade, Bassendean. I did send a question through, but I'll read it out here. How does the town of Bassendean intend to improve protection of trees within the town, in particular those on private property, as part of the revision of the local planning scheme?
Mr Gibson?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as mentioned previously, draft local plan scheme number 11 includes provisions relating to a significant tree register. As part of the consultation process, which is ongoing until mid-July, the town has received various comments about tree protection on private land, and that issue, amongst others that are raised to the submissions, will be considered at Council's August 2023 meeting.
Because, the tree preservation orders are already a feature of TPS 10, and they've been effective when they have been administered properly, and so you don't think there's any scope to include that same policy in the TPS 11?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the significant tree register is functionally the same as the tree preservation order. It's just under a different title, and that will be, as I say, considered by Council at the August 2023 meeting.
Okay, thank you, Ms Jefferson. Further questions from other members of the audience? Otherwise, we've got a few minutes left, so I'll ask Mr Robinson if he'd like to complete his remaining two questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Number 4, this sort of relates to the response that the CEO gave. If no formal compliance action is pursued in the case of the Ashfield Parade trees, does Council agree that a precedent has been set that encourages landholders to see a tree preservation nomination as an incentive to destroy? A green light for the chainsaw, so to speak.
Mr Gibson. Mr Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, such an action would not be considered to constitute a precedent in the typical sense. However, it is acknowledged that on occasion there has been a situation where landowners, when presented with a nomination for a tree on their property, have chosen to remove it. So staff do acknowledge that has occurred in the past.
And your final question, sir.
I have. This has already been asked in a different way. What future protections, and I guess my emphasis is protections, of significant trees on private property does the town envisage including in the TPS that is currently under development?
Through Madam Mayor, as answer to the previous questioner, draft local plan scheme number 11 does include provisions relating to a significant tree register, which functionally is very similar to the current tree preservation provisions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors.
Thank you, Mr Robinson. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no further questions, we will move on to the next item. And I can't see anyone else with their hand up. Item 8 is petitions. I don't believe we have any. So councillors will now move on to confirmation of the minutes So we have item 9.1, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 23rd of May be received and be confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a mover? Councillor McLennan, a seconder, Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. There are no external committee reports or updates. So we'll now move on, councillors, to the officer reports. Now, coming out of en bloc, I have item 12.2. Councillors, do you have any other items to come out of en bloc? So that leaves item 12.9, 12.10, 12.11 and 12.12 to be moved en bloc. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor McWilliams, seconded Councillor Carter. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare those carried. So with that, councillors, we will now move on to item 12.2, which is the Arts, Culture and Events Committee meeting the 6th of June. Now, I'm not sure if the officer would like to speak to this one at all. I think it was covered off very well last week. So, councillors, as I indicated to you earlier today, I would like to separate out the items in this officer recommendation because I am aware that item 2 has a minor amendment proposed by a councillor, and I'm aware that item 6 has an alternative proposed by another councillor. So that would leave dot point 1, 3, 4 and 5 as the officer recommendation, and I would like to see if there is a mover for those remaining items. Councillor Ames, do we have a seconder? Councillor Polifka, do we have anyone against? So I will declare for item 12.2 dot points 1, 3, 4 and 5 as carried. Now this then brings us to dot point 2. And I'll read out what the officer's recommendation is. Committee recommendation that, subject to the Minister for Lands granting consent to the agreement, authorises the town enter into a new licence agreement for Movies by Burswood Bassendean based on the previous licence to be for a 1-year period commencing on the 1st of November 2024 and expiring on the 30th of April 2025, with a mutual option for a further 12-month expiring on the 30th of April 2026. Now, I understand, Councillor McLennan, that you wanted to amend those timelines. So would you like to advise the council what your amendment is?
Yes, thank you. As councillors would be aware, the original officer recommendation on this item that went to the committee proposed a longer period of the licence agreement. I would propose that council adopt the original recommendation that went to that committee, so that the licence would instead be expiring 30th of April 2026, with an option to extend for 12 months to 2027.
Okay, so Councillor McLennan, would you like to move that?
Yes, I'm happy to move it.
So, councillors, do I have a second? Councillor Wilding. Do I have anyone? Councillor Polifka.
Just a question.
Microphone.
The 2 as drafted mentions a mutual option, so I assume either party can exercise that. Are we intending to have that same arrangement under Councillor McLennan's?
I assume so on the last year, yes. So in other words, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor McLennan, that we are looking at a 2-year period plus the additional 1-year optional period agreed by both parties.
Correct.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Polifka?
Well, certainly for the term, but so it is the case in this mutual option, we're happy for the service provider to be able to exercise that option and compel us to take an additional year.
Mr. Gibson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I understand it is by mutual agreement. Both parties are required to agree to the extension.
Oh, okay. All right, if that's what that terminology means, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a mover, we have a seconder. Do we have anyone against? Councillor Ames, okay, so we'll enter into debate. Councillor McLennan, if you'd like to open, please. Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is obviously just a very minor amendment. However, the reason for proposing it back to what the officers originally presented to the committee is to be in alignment with our stated priorities around town centre activation. For a relatively small annual fee, the town is able to provide this activation in our town centre about 4 months a year, 5 nights a week. It brings people from within the area and outside the area into our town centre, which then also supports our local businesses such as the food and beverage businesses that operate along Old Perth Road. We know that this has been very popular with our community in the past, but we also know that of all of the venues that Telethon Community Cinemas operate, that ours is the least profitable. So if they were to decide that it wasn't financially viable for them to continue at all the sites they currently operate, ours would be the one that would cease, would be likely to cease. As we know, the cinemas actually approached the town looking for a renewed licence, so they had some certainty around the future to deliver this event in our town centre. They've got some significant financial outlay that they need to commit to around equipment. I think that us providing a longer period of licence helps to provide them with the certainty they need to be able to make that commitment. We know that the community is very supportive of this. I know that one of the concerns that was raised at the committee, though, was around the use of that space on the BIC reserve, and that we may potentially have plans to upgrade the reserve at some stage, and we didn't want to limit what could be done in that space. However, I think the reality is that any changes to the BIC are going to be further down the track than the length of this licence agreement. So I'd encourage councillors to think about our priorities, our community's priorities around bringing more people to our town centre to activate that space, and that this is already a successful activation. I see no reason for us to discourage it and we should take the opportunity to secure their presence in our town centre for as long as possible.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Councillor Wilding waiving her right to debate. Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, and I don't discount anything you've said, Councillor McLennan. I was in the room for the ACE committee meeting where the gentleman for the Movers by Burswood was present, and it was a pretty easy discussion, and it was a mutual agreement that what has been provided by the ACE committee was acceptable. So obviously, as the mover of that particular motion at the ACE committee, I'd like to stand by what has been presented here to council, but I still don't have any objections in regards to what was said. Definitely the Movers by Burswood is a fantastic initiative to have in the town, but I'd still like to stand by the decision that was made within the ACE committee, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Ames. Would it be possible for me to ask one question of the officer on this one? But we're in debate.
I think given the fact it's been through an ACE committee.
No, that's okay. Anyone for the amendment? Councillors, we're in debate, so if you'd like to debate for, Councillor McLennan's, Councillor Plivka.
Madam Mayor, point of order, given the fact that the question is to the ACE committee itself, I would allow it if you have, you feel so.
Okay, so you may ask a question.
Yes, so just the negotiations that occurred during that committee process. So what you were saying is that that was an agreed amount of time that both parties were comfortable with. Was there discussion of a greater period of time, and in your view, would they be comfortable with that, or is that something which would have to be renegotiated?
No, absolutely. That's it definitely was a scenario that whenever period of time was agreed upon at that meeting that it would be accepted. It was, those that were around the table on that day that we had decided upon what's been presented here this evening. So if it was to be moved with Councillor McLennan's alternate motion for this particular item, there would be no discourse for that to be approved this evening.
Okay. So, councillors, do we have further debate for Councillor McLennan's amendment? Do we have further debate against Councillor McLennan's amendment? Councillor Carter?
I'll just make a brief statement that...
Yes, we're debating.
We're debating, yeah.
So,
My statement is that it is almost 3 years because it goes to the 30th of April 2026. So it's not 2 years. We're still in this 1 year. So yes, and it appeared to be that being quite acceptable to the movies by those people.
So, councillors, is there further debate for or against this proposed amendment? Okay, on that basis, I will put this to the vote. So all those in favour of Councillor McLennan's amendment, please raise your hands. Okay, all those against, so we have Councillor McWilliam, Councillor Polifka, Councillor Carter, Councillor Ames and myself. So thank you, councillors. Okay, we'll now move on to item 6.6. Now the office, sorry.
We haven't actually moved another motion at this stage.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry.
We need to go back to the office or the ACE Committee's recommendation.
Okay,
Move and second.
yes. So we have the officer recommendation. So what we need now is a councillor to move the officer recommendation for dot point 2.
Committee recommendation.
Yes, the committee recommendation. So Councillor Ames, a seconder. Councillor Carter. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So thank you, councillors, and thank you for being patient with me tonight. So, councillors, we now go on to dot point 6 as a separate one. I'll read out the officer recommendation. The officer's recommendation, or the committee's recommendation, apologies, agrees to the staging of Celebrating Birack in early December, incorporating recognition of International Volunteer Day, and notes that a citizenship ceremony will be hosted in late January. Now, I'm aware that we have Councillor Carter has sent through an alternative, and I will allow Councillor Carter to read out just the alternative motion, not the reasons, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a slight change in wording, but it's essentially the same as I sent in. That we move the recommendation from item 12.2 with the following amendment. That Council amends point 6 as follows. Request the CEO to facilitate an inclusive community Birack celebration sundowner event that incorporates a citizenship ceremony and other appropriate elements in advance of the 2024 Australia Day long weekend, where this event is to be held on the 25th of January 2024 at Mary Crescent Reserve, and additionally request the CEO to have applications made for grant funding that may supplement the expense of running this event.
Thank you. So, before I move, I would just like to give the officer or the CEO an opportunity to speak to this if you so desire. No? Okay. Okay. So, councillors, we have before us 2 recommendations. One is the committee recommendation, point 6, and the other one is the one as proposed by Councillor Carter. Now it's open to Councillor McLennan.
Sorry, I just had a question. I know the CEO just said that you didn't want to speak to this, but I had a question, if you wouldn't mind. I'm not so much asking about any any opinion on dates and content and so on, but just in terms of having an event at that time that's proposed, whether there are any logistical concerns that the staff might have.
Thanks, councillor. No, I think if council make a decision tonight, it's incumbent on the staff to try and facilitate the event. What I would say is that if it was held on the long weekend, it would be much more difficult and costly to host. So I would think that that date is preferable from a staffing point of view. It doesn't incur penalties, and probably even attracting contractors and food vans, because they'll be probably engaged elsewhere in the metropolitan area on Australia Day and the other day. So if we are competing in that place with every other local government, which I think we will be, that's probably a preferable event date.
So councillors, we have two different recommendations in front of us. We have a recommendation and we have an alternative. I would like to ask Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to get this pretty crystal clear in my head. Are we saying that Councillor Carter's amended documentation here will replace the committee's recommendation in point 6?
It is an alternative written to replace that. However, it is entirely up to the councillors here in front of me to move either one of those. And so we have Councillor Carter, who clearly would want to move hers, but it's entirely up to any councillor around this table to move the committee recommendation as well. So I am asking for a mover. So Councillor Ames, you would like to move?
I'd like to move the committee's recommendation, point 6, as it stands.
Okay, so can I ask if there's a seconder? So Councillor Ames, that lapses for a seconder. So we now go to Councillor Carter. Would you like to move your alternative?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I so move.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor McLennan. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So thank you, councillors, and thank you, staff, for your diligence in providing information on this item. Okay. So, apologies. So the next item is 12.3. This plastic 2.15 single-use plastics and balloon policy. Would you like to speak to this, Ms Davey?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So following the briefing session, there was a question about the timing of the stage 2 bans. So some additional information has been included in the report, and the officer recommendation has been changed for the revocation to take effect from the 1st of March 2024, and that coincides with the ban on plastic hot beverage cups, and that was the key item that's currently in our policy that is not yet in effect with the bans.
Thank you, Ms Davey. So, councillors, are there any questions on this item? So, councillors, you have a officer recommendation. I don't believe I've seen any suggestions for anything alternate. Do I have a move? Councillor McWilliam, you're moving the item. A seconder? Councillor Ames. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So, councillors, we'll move on to 12.4, which was review of council policies, water sensitive urban design and water conservation and wetlands. So again, councillors, I have not observed any alternates to this one. I will read out the officer recommendation for the public gallery. It is published in our agenda. That council, pursuant to the Local Government Act 1995, revokes the following council policies: 2.9 water sensitive urban design and water conservation, and 2.11 wetlands. Now, obviously, this is to revoke these policies. So, councillors, if there are no further questions, I'll ask if there is anyone wishing to move this item. Councillor McWilliam. Is there a seconder? Councillor Polifka. Opposed? Councillor Carter. Was that your hand going up?
I'm opposed.
Yes, okay. So councillors will enter into debate. Councillor,
May I just ask councillors who are opposed to this what their alternative would be to revoking?
okay, councillors.
Just if there's something that's foreshadowed for the rest of us to consider.
Okay. So, councillors, I'm going to ask the staff member a question in relation to that, if you don't mind. Ms Davey, if these policies are not revoked at this point in time, my understanding is that they would remain in effect until the next review date. Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe they would remain in effect until they are revoked.
Yes. Okay. But the policies themselves have review dates on them, correct? Or they should have, yes.
Probably just a point of order, Madam Mayor, and maybe Ms Davey can clarify. I think at the briefing we said that if we don't revoke these, some of the information within the policies are no longer correct due to legislative changes. So would that require administration and staff time to bring these particular policies up to speed rather than revoke them and use another method?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. If the policies aren't revoked, they would need to be modified so they contain up-to-date information.
So can I ask another question, Ms Davey, if you don't mind? Subsequent to the briefing, I sent you through a link to the South Perth Water Sensitive Urban Design Policy, which had been updated, I think, less than 2 years ago. Would that assist in updating that policy?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think our policy would need to consider the nature of the development in the area and also financial constraints. The other consideration is that the local government that had the policy you sent through has a large number of council policies, I believe over 100. So it's much more of a broader extent than what we would be able to implement.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Ms Davey. How long have the information within the current policies been, as you deemed, incorrect? Are we talking a couple of weeks? Are we talking a couple of years?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd have to review that, but it refers to previous local planning policies that no longer exist. Building Code of Australia that may no longer be current. As the policy hasn't been reviewed since 2014, there would be quite a lot of documents that are now out of date.
Okay. So, councillors, we have a mover for the office recommendation. We have a seconder for the office recommendation. We have someone against. So I would like to ask if you're still moving and seconding, are we now heading into debate? Because you've heard some questions now. So Councillor McWilliam, you moved the item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm minded to refer to the report of the officer and just making sure that if we have current documents that are reflecting or receptive to this, as in the LPS, then surely that should be the vehicle for these matters to be encapsulated in. If in fact we are going to bother to revisit these policies at all, because they're already being adhered to or included in new documentation. Thank you.
Councillor Plevka, I believe you seconded.
Yes, certainly.
You don't have to stand at the microphone.
That's right. Much obliged, thank you. Yes, so water-sensitive urban design and water conservation and wetlands. I mean, who wouldn't want those policies? But the reality is we don't currently have them. I mean, we're lulling ourselves into a false sense of security to say that we have a policy when it's something which the officer has indicated to us is so outdated as to basically be of little value. So let's, I suppose, be proactive about it, revoke these, and to the extent that we need new and better policies, let's get on with that. Thank you.
So, Councillor Plevka, no, I'll allow debate to continue. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'll be quite brief because it's going to be a long night. I believe that we do need to retain our water sensitive and urban design and water conservation policy. There is not a policy to replace this as yet. When it does come, terrific. It won't take a great deal to update it because it's just sort of more format. The intent of the policy will remain as it is. I think we should retain it until we have something better to replace it with.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Other councillors for? Councillors against? I'll speak against this one in that I thank the staff for their efforts. Water sensitive urban design is a very important element of our work in the town, and I do think, for instance, there's a great deal that can be gained from having policies like this in the public realm, so that our community can see what our policies are, so that our staff and our councillors can see what our policies are. If the policy requires to be updated, then I feel that that is something that should be done. Is it urgent at this point in time? I don't think so, but I would eventually like to see that policy updated. Now, that to me means that we possibly could retain the policy for a period of time until the staff may have scheduled it in to be updated. Certainly I have looked at the policy from South Perth that has been updated every 2 years, and it has links to all sorts of state government associated policies. I'm sure, having time constraints, I'm sure that if I had searched further, I might have been able to find more policies of that nature. I don't necessarily believe that we have, okay, I'll correct myself, in some areas I believe that we have excelled in water sensitive urban design. In other areas I think that we could potentially apply those principles in a more dedicated manner. So I don't wish to see this policy revoked at this point in time, and I would like to see this policy updated in the long term. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. I just had a question for the mover and the seconder of the motion, just acknowledging there's some differences of opinion around this. Whether the mover would consider adding a second point, so revoking the current policies, but a second point along the lines of requests the CEO to update the water sensitive urban design and water conservation and wetland policies at a future date.
Mover.
Yes, I'd be accepting.
And the CEO would like to make a comment on
Point of order,
that.
Madam Mayor. I'm just in the essence of trying to get efficient and effective local government.
Yes.
I think Ms Davies made it quite clear during the briefing that it's not a matter of updating a policy for updating a policy's sake. There are other planning instruments within the state, and we've committed to an action plan with the Water Corp. So what we're saying, the officer is saying, is that we have other mechanisms that we're currently using to achieve the same outcomes. So what we're actually doing now is talking about a policy that is not required, and therefore our resources shouldn't be put to areas where we are basically developing new policies when we don't need them. Our role should be to reduce our policies till they are almost non-existent, because state planning policies and other legislation guides how we work. But policy for the sake of policy, because it makes people feel good, is not the business we should be in.
Okay. So, Councillor McWilliam, you were asked to accept an amendment. It would seem to me that the amendment is perhaps unworkable in that context. Might I suggest that we could proceed through the debate on this and foreshadow a potential request for the administration to update the policy. So if this fails, the policy continues to exist, and there could be a potential foreshadowed motion to update the policy in due course. Now, that is a suggestion only, but councillors, I think that the methodology, and perhaps this, I think the CEO is correct, that the formatting of adding that dot point into a policy that's going to be revoked. Okay, so councillors, we can continue with the debate on this. Okay, so we're now at the point of councillors. Do I have any further councillors wishing to debate in support of the officer recommendation? Do I have any councillors wishing to debate against the officer recommendation? So I'm going to put this to the vote. Those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? So that's carried. Did you need the names?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So we move to item 12.5, which is the draft amended local planning policy for heritage and character. And again, the officer recommendation is that council, pursuant to clauses 4.1 and 9.3 of Schedule 2 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015, advertises the draft amended local planning policy for heritage and character, including the proposed designation of the Elsfrey Heritage Area as attached to this report. Now, I think that the officer provided a comprehensive summary of this last week, but I will ask councillors, are there any further questions on this? Do I have a mover? Councillor McLennan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Carter. Do I have anyone against? I declare that carried. Okay, the next one is 12.6, draft amended local planning policy 2, sustainable development. And the recommendation that council, pursuant to clause 5.2 of Schedule 2, deem provisions of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes Regulations 2015, provisionally adopts draft amended local planning policy 2, sustainable development, to be effective from the 1st of September 2023. Again, councillors, I think the officer provided a fairly comprehensive explanation of this. Councillor McLean, you'd like to move it or ask a question? You'd like to move it? Seconding, Councillor McWilliam. Anyone against? Declare that carried. Okay, councillors, we now move to 12.7, which is the budget item. And I believe Mr. White has an amendment that he would like to bring to your attention.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Just a couple of changes to the report since the briefing session last week. The first one is in relation to differential rates. The advertising closed. That closed the business last Thursday after the agenda had been produced. There were no further submissions, and the only submission is outlined in the report. The second one is two additional recommendations at the end of recommendation 2. This appears on page 50 of the agenda. These two recommendations, the first one is to accommodate a concession. There's no new content. These were covered in the body of the report, but the recommendations were omitted. So the first one would be an addition, paragraph I, to provide Westcare with the second year of their 50% rates concession.
Sorry, what was that number?
It's page 50
Yep.
of the agenda,
Yep, I've got that.
and recommendation 2,
Okay,
so additional recommendation 2I
right.
and 2J, and J is to facilitate the E-rates competition. And finally, in addition to recommendation 3, this has arisen again last Thursday. DPLH provided new fees applicable to the Development Assessment Panel from the 1st of July in a few days' time. Obviously, again, that was post-production of the agenda, so we'd like to incorporate the new fee schedule. I handed the new schedule around just prior to tonight's meeting. That's a single sheet of A4 paper. And we would propose that recommendation 3 at the end be added with the following amendment. Replace the Development Assessment Panel fees pursuant to Schedule 1 of the Planning and Development Assessment Panel Regulations 2011 with the updated schedule provided to the town by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage on the 22nd of June 2023. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillors, you're clear on that? Is that it? Okay. So, councillors, unless we've got any questions, I would like to move on to the officer recommendations for the budget. Are there any questions before I move to that? Okay. So, in the hard copy of the documents, the officer recommendations start on page 49. And the first one relates to the 2023 annual budget. Now, you have that in front of you. I won't read the whole thing out. But unless anyone wants me to read it out. Councillor McLean, you're moving it? Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Ames, anyone against? Declare that carried. Okay, the next one is point 2, the rates, instalment payment arrangements, administration fees and interest. So this is the one that has the additional I and J that Mr. White mentioned. I'd like to know if we've got a mover for that. Councillor Ames? Question, yes?
And through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. White, just in regards to point J, and sorry I didn't answer this question whilst we were speaking about it previously. The grants concession of the $500 opportunity for a ratepay within the town of Bassendean, is that ever since all ratepayers were introduced to jumping onto the E-rates, or is that just for a period of the last sort of financial year?
Through you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for the question, Councillor. Yeah, it's anybody, any property owner who has registered for E-rates by the 30th of June, whether for prior years or this year.
And if I can actually ask a supplement question, I'm assuming that if you find a councillor and their name is pulled out of the hat, you will discount us.
Through you, Madam Mayor, unfortunately,
Yes,
that is the case, yes.
I just wanted to make that public that we're not in the running. So,
All staff members.
okay, thank you for that. So do we have a mover for that point, the section 2? Councillor Wilding, a seconder? Councillor McLennan? Anyone against? Councillor Polivka? Okay. You're against, you're not asking a question?
No, against, but just one very specific part.
Would you perhaps like...
Foreshadowing that, so whoever's speaking for that can address that issue. Just the differential rates. So.
Okay. So, councillors, we will enter into debate if you wish to debate on this. So,
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I have moved the officer's recommendation as put because the work the officers have put in leading up to this point has been based on the figures in the report provided, and councillors have not provided any objection to those figures up to this point, so it doesn't seem particularly reasonable to tweak it at the last minute, given that up to this point it has been considered acceptable. It is also very difficult to debate the motion, given I'm unsure of the objection at this point.
okay. So, I think you'll find it's in principle. Councillor McLennan, no. Councillor,
Yes, the Mayor knows me well. It is a principled objection. Just, I don't believe that using rates to essentially act as an economic coercion to make people do things is what we should be doing. But yes, it's just a principled objection.
okay. Any other councillors for or against? I'll put that to the vote. Those all in favour? And against we have Councillor Polifka. Thank you. The next section is, sorry.
I'm just moving it.
Section 3. I'm sorry, Councillor Wilding, I did not ask you if you wanted to close in your debate, but it seemed to me that you were quite fine with that. So the next section is fees and charges. Councillor McLennan is moving that. Councillor Ames is seconding. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Okay, the next section is section 4, elected members' fees and allowances. Again, I'll ask if there is a mover. Councillor Ames, seconder. Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Okay. The next section is section 5, reserves. Change in purpose, change in use of funds. Councillor McLennan is moving. Councillor McWilliam is seconding. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Next section is section 6, loan, underground power. Councillor McLennan is moving. Councillor Carter seconding. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Last section is materiality, and again, I would ask for a mover. Councillor McLennan seconding. Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Congratulations, councillors, and congratulations, staff. I do believe that is the fastest timeline I've ever seen for a budget approval. So thank you very much, and thank you to our CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I reflect that the minutes acknowledge the amount of work that the corporate services team have done, particularly the director and his finance manager. It's an outstanding budget. I commend you both. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I think the work you've put in is reflected by how quickly councillors accepted all of those recommendations. So thank you very much. Apart from one in principle. Okay. So councillors, the last remaining item on the agenda is the Audit and Governance Committee meeting of the 12th of June 2023. Again, Mr. White did speak to this last week. I will ask if you have any additional comments that you'd like to make, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, nothing further.
Okay, councillors, do you have any questions? Okay, is that a mover? Councillor Polifka, seconded. Councillor McWilliam. Do I have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. And we will come to closing. And sorry, there's no motions of which previous notice has been given. There's no announcements of notices of motion for the next meeting, I believe. There's no urgent business. There's no confidential business. So this does bring us to the closure. So our next briefing session will be held on Tuesday, the 18th of July, commencing at 6 p.m. And our next Ordinary Council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 25th of July, commencing at 6 p.m.